everybody. Hope you're having a good day, etc., and so on and so on. I'm having a nice morning. These new Fralins have just transmogrified this casino, made it a much, much better sounding guitar, which is, as a result, much more enjoyable to play. And I'm auditioning Overdrive pedals for the channel. More on that in a moment. Good to see everybody here. How's it sound out there? Everything okay? Audio and visual wise? We went for my wife and I went for a walk with the dog this morning because the weather is just splendid. And I just got back and I washed my face and brushed my teeth and got pretty for you guys. And I decided that I'm not ready to go back to coffee yet after that lovely walk. And it's about 76 degrees out there. So, Abita Amber. Cheers to you all. Shante. So maybe I'll just keep this guitar here. It's a nice security blanket. Covers my gut, too. Visuals are a little bright. Well, I'm a rather clever guy. So I've been thinking about, hey, everyone give a shout out to Steve Albini. Rest in peace. We'll start with the amp questions, just a few. One of the things I've been considering for the channel for quite some time, because I tend to show the amps just guitar straight in, any overdrive, etc., is just, what the amp itself does. But there is a wide world of people out there who want to know how a amp, quote, takes pedals. What is a pedal platform, etc., etc. So I thought I'd get some overdrive pedals to have available. Nothing too esoteric or hard to get. Not one of my old ones. Certainly those are impossible for most people to get, though I do think they sound really good. Something which, is relatable. I might pick up just like an SD1 or something like that, as well as a bass line. But I've been trying this Barber gain changer. Let me do it so you don't just see it in my hand. I've had the fortune to become friends with Keith Williams from 5 Watt World, and he's friends with Dave Barber, and watched some interviews with Dave, and he seems to know as much about what he does as what I try to know about what I do, and haven't heard him say any things which make me cringe, which is kind of rare in the tech world. And a friend had this pedal, has been letting me try it, and I'm a little bit on the fence because it's got a 2-position switch and a 3-position switch, and you get very different sounds depending on the combination. And you can get option paralysis. You're never quite sure if you have really found the best. So far in my testing with various guitars and various amps, I think it's a really great pedal for Gibsons, including P90s. I'm not entirely sold on it for Fenders, Strats and Tellys yet, but more testing is required. It's a good sound, though. I like it. It's, I think, certainly a leading candidate. I've tried an awful lot of pedals on the market, and most of them make me cringe. This doesn't make me cringe. So more testing to follow, and once I'm sure I really know how that pedal do, I'll probably do a review and show how it's built and all that fun stuff. Because if I'm going to get a pedal and feature it on the channel, I want you guys to know what it is and why I chose it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm qualified to give a build quality review. I've opened it up, and short answer is it's really well built. I think if this were mine, I might find the one setting that I like and either fix it so it's always that, or might change the voicing of what the switches do to give me, I say this is my target range, and just make it a little more flexible within that range, as opposed to making the range as big as he's made it. And that's not a slam on David. He's selling a pedal for potentially thousands of people to use in different ways. I only need to worry about the way I'm going to use it. So but I'm impressed with it. It's got a low self noise. There's no popping when I turn it on and off. As you heard, it cleans up nicely, and when you clean it up, the noise floor doesn't stay high. It is a good pedal. I'm not a particular fan of this Desert 10, but it does come in red and some other colors. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to pick one of those up for myself. All right, let's get to some of the questions. And you guys tell me if you think having an overdrive pedal, a known overdrive pedal or small selection of pedals to demonstrate amps with, show how, hey, this is how a deluxe reverb responds, this is how a Princeton responds, this is how an AC-15 responds, etc. Or this is why you may not want that with certain amps that are just, no headroom. Anyway, let's go up to the top and start with the questions. And I look forward to your responses and all this. Chris R. Hey, Chris, he says, any tips for hunting down stray vibrations in a combo when, as best you can tell, all the hardware is tight? Well, if the hardware is tight and you have stray vibrations, typically you're going to be running into either a bad solder joint, a microphonic component, or a microphonic tube. And of that list, the microphonic tube and the bad solder joint are the most common. What I will often do, which seems kind of strange, is I will take an electric toothbrush and I'll turn it on, and I'll use the plastic handle of it to vibrate areas around the board. I haven't shown it in the videos in a long time, but that's what I do. Because when you have an amp in a combo especially, and the speaker's moving, everything is vibrating really fast, much faster than you can tap with a chopstick or a pencil. You cannot tap at even 80 hertz, let alone 400 hertz, 400 times a second, let alone 80 times a second. But that electric toothbrush will typically do 120 times a second, or multiples of that, maybe 240, depending on what it's doing. And that will vibrate things a very small amount, very fast, and that sometimes will reveal a problem in a solder joint or a component that no amount of tapping with a pencil will reveal. That's what I do. And then use the other end for your teeth. And in general, you want to have a dedicated toothbrush for this that never has gotten wet. But it doesn't have to be expensive. Go get the cheapest thing you can find at Target or whatever. It just has to vibrate faster than you can tap. And if you get really lonely, you might find a different use on your bench. Hey, Emilio. Hey, K. Michael P. Do I know anything about Marshall? No, I don't. No. I've got lots of really cool Marshalls to share with you guys very soon. And this high watt is coming at you. And maybe someday I'll know something about it. I certainly get people telling me all the time on those damn Origin 20 videos that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that it is the best thing since sliced bread, and blah, 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 blah. The reaction to the Origin 20 videos and the Origin 50 and the Vox AC 10 C1, just every day someone's telling me I'm a moron, and it means I'm doing something right, because, I never joined a club that would have me as a member. They're all in one particular club. What is my opinion on GA15 RVT Explorer amps? Are there any vintage amps to stay away from? The trouble with Gibsons is that there are so many different versions over such a relatively short period of time, all with the same model number. So you can have one that's great and one that's terrible, and they may be a year apart, similar cosmetics, called the same model. But a really good example of a GA 15, 18, 20, and 40, some of those are some of the best amps ever made as far as the sound. In terms of the sound, there are construction and quality issues that come with those, but they can all be fixed typically. A lot of times the ground scheme needs to be revisited, improved a little bit. As far as the vintage Gibson amps to stay away from, that's tricky. A lot of the ones starting about 61, 62 started to use what's called a T filter to keep the amp from getting dirty. And sometimes the amps would have multiple T filters. So as the 60s progressed, Gibson amps got, from a modern guitarist perspective, less and less useful. And the 50s and very early 60 ones are great. Some, pardon me, some of those early 60s amps, which do have the T filters, you can have a tech bypass the T filter and the amp comes alive and it sounds fantastic. Others, the T filters were so integral to the design that you bypass them and everything else goes sideways. There is a reason that Gibson is renowned for their guitars and Fender is renowned for their guitars and amps. Let Fender have the amps and Gibson have the acoustics, basically, starting about 63-ish. I appreciate the super chats. I will get to all of them. Unlike other channels that drop everything whenever a super chat comes in, I don't have a moderator to put that up on the screen for me, and I'm not going to ignore everyone else. But I will certainly answer any and all super chats before the end of the chat. It's just the stuff that typically comes in the last hour of the 3 hours we do this that I don't always get to. Hello to everyone. The Fralins are really good on this Taylor nut. Thank you very much. Yeah, Lawlers are also good. Lawler does not have the correct chrome dog ear covers. If you want one with black plastic, they have the black plastic dog ears that are great, and Lawler makes great pickups. But the only option to keep the nickel or chrome covers, these are nickel, is to send the Asian import pickups to Lawler, and they take all the insides out and put real pickups in the old covers. But those old covers that are used in the import casinos, etc., are the wrong kind of metal. They're not the nickel German silver thing that is fairly transparent. Fralin gets the covers made by the same company that makes covers for Gibson Historic USA. And the Gibson pickups that they make on the USA lines are also really good, but they don't sell them third market. They don't sell them aftermarket. If Gibson were to take these stock pickups and make them sound better, there'd be no need to change them out. Let's measure this for DCR real fast. I know what the DCR of the Fralin is. Now, DCR is not the end-all be-all of how a pickup will sound. There's how it's wound, the wire used, et cetera, et cetera. But for a P90, they should be typically in a certain range, and those Fralins are about 6.5K on average. This is 8.85K, and I suspect that it's got a different kind of wire because this thing is really hot and really dark. And for the same price, they could have made this sound an awful lot better, and there'd be no need to swap them out. If this guitar had come with passable pickups and spent the money on getting some covers that looked the part but didn't roll off so much highs, and it come with audio taper pots as opposed to the linear it came with, and here them up, and also had come with lock washers, toothed washers, I wouldn't have had to do all this electronics upgrades on this guitar, but it came with linear taper pots, crappy output jack, crappy switch, no toothed washers. You guys have seen the video. I wasn't a fan of the bridge radius was terrible. It was just impossible to get this thing to have a good fret height across the neck because the radius of the bridge was like 9 or 8 versus the 12 of the board. Anyway, all that's dealt with now. So let's see. I'm glad it sounded good out there. I'm never sure how the guitar stuff's going to sound on these because I'm using the same SM57 and it's not aimed. The speaker's over there and it's aimed this way, so it's 30 degrees off axis, and a good 10 feet away. So this is not the optimal way to do it. But if I were to have the mic on that cab hooked up through this, I'd have to be constantly muting this mic and turning on the guitar mic and vice versa. Maybe if I do one of these where I have someone who's a really great player featured on the stream, I'll set that up. Hey, Martin. Good to see you there from Scotland. Do smaller amps need a choke? and he's hoping to see the Northern Lights again after my chat. I hope you do see the Northern Lights. Apparently, they're going to be visible as far south here as Alabama. I hope that we don't have huge telecommunications outages as a result, but it should be a hell of a show tonight if you live in a place that doesn't have a lot of light pollution. Here in Memphis, I doubt we'll see anything, but maybe. Small amps do not need a choke. No amp needs a choke. Some amps have chokes, and some people in certain circuits will prefer the sound of a choke, and they can impart a certain sound, like an AC30 with that 20 Henry choke. That choke is ridiculously expensive and is ridiculously overkill as far as the inductance for the task, but that imparts a certain sound. And a Marshall with a almost 4K choke 4 Henry choke is very different than one with a 10 Henry choke, et cetera, et cetera. And the Fender with a 3.7 Henry, whatever it is different than others. But back in the day, chokes were used because they were commonly available inexpensive transformers, whereas to replace them with a resistor would take a 5 watt or 10 watt resistor, which was very uncommon and very expensive back in the 50s and early 60s. So as power resistors of greater wattage capability, power handling capability became less expensive, it became a better option to use one of those than to use a choke. Now, there is a subtle difference in feel between a choke and a resistor. And an amp which has a resistor instead of a choke will typically need a little more in the way of filter caps than a choke. A choke by itself removes more ripple from the DC that's feeding it than does just a resistor followed by a cap. So if you have an amp which may have 20 microfarad and then a choke and then 20 microfarad, to get the same level of filtering with a resistor, you might want to go 30 resistor 30. So it's not just one thing you need to change if you're really trying to do it right. But if you have an amp which has a resistor between the first and second, the reservoir and screen nodes typically on your filter supply, and the amp is designed well, you may not get any benefit from a choke. But I tell you, if you spend $30 on a choke and then $150 to have a tech install the choke, so $200 later for that choke, you damn better hear a difference with that choke, and most people, as a result, do or claim to. Our brains are funny things. Let's see, to Steve, yes. Hey, Surge98. What is my preferred method for replacing a damaged or missing PCB solder pad? My preferred method typically would be to get a turret from Mauser or DigiKey and drill a very small hole where necessary, potentially into an undamaged area of the trace, and to scrape away any conformal coating on the outside of the trace so that the solder connects the trace and that turret, and then the component lead goes in that turret. What is often necessary due to budgetary reasons is that instead you just remove maybe half an inch of the coating on a trace and tin it so that there's a strip of solder there, and you attach the lead to that instead of just to a pad. Hopefully, if there's any mass or size to that component, you can also stabilize it with some silicone, etc. It's best not to lift a pad if you can help it. On some old Marshalls, they've been so far gone that I've just replaced the board. I've got a 76 super lead on the channel where someone had just butchered the hell out of the old board, so I just made a new one for it. And that amp was better after that than it ever had been, but of course wasn't a collector grade. It was, unless people start collecting the amps that I do that on. So the market's crazy. I was just trying to make make a very reliable amp for the owner. Hey, Jimmy Mack. Yeah, I hope you hurry back. For new builds, you should almost always use radial electrolytics when possible, because the axials are being phased out. The axials that are still available are not always of the same high quality. What's in a blue Sprague Atom is garbage these days. It's not the same capacitor they were 30 years ago. Whereas if you go to Nishikon, Panasonic, Rubicon, United Chemcon, you can see the specs. You can get something rated for 12,000 hours, 105-degree rated, and know all the specs, know the ESR, all this stuff, and you also know that if in 15 years that cap needs to be replaced, there'll be a radial electrolytic on the market that will fit in the same space versus axial. If you design a new amp with axials 15 years from now, good luck. Someone's going to have to do a lot of work retrofitting retrofitting radials into your old axial build. So they're a better idea pragmatically, electronically, from a design perspective, and they as a result, they will sound better if you use them properly. Now, a trick on axials versus radials is on an axial board. Typically, the layout is done with an eyelet or a turret, and typically those are going to be 3/8 of an inch apart. Sometimes less, but typically at least 3/8 of an inch apart. So every component on that board tends to be fairly widely spaced out. The temptation with a lot of amp designers who are doing PCB layouts, who have learned how to do PCB layouts in other kinds of electronics where heat and current and radiant fields aren't as much of an issue, is they'll have all the components very close together, and as a result, you can have your radial caps all bunched up together into little clusters where they're all touching each other. And you really get better results in an audio amplifier, specifically for guitar or hi-fi, if there is some space between components, because each component does have an electromagnetic field and they will interact with each other. So if you have, the difference between two caps touching each other and two caps 3/8 of an inch apart electronically is huge. You can also do things like say, well, I could use this 47 microfarad cap, or I could use two 22 microfarad caps in parallel, and electronically it's the same, but hey, those two caps in parallel are going to have lower ESR. They're going to last longer. There are tricks you can do once you go to radial caps, because they're typically going to be smaller and take up less real estate. But that gets into a much deeper subject. Greg G. Hey, he built a Mojitone Deluxe Reverb last week. What mods would I recommend? None yet. Play it for a long time. Get to know that amp really well. Let's assume that you built it absolutely perfectly and it's behaving as it should. Learn how that Deluxe Reverb circuit works. Then a year from now, if you have a wish list of things that you wish were a little bit different, once you really know it, come back and ask me at that point and tell me what you wish was different or what you've not been as happy with as you expected. But the baseline of a well-performing stock Deluxe Reverb is a really good place to be. And I think any guitarist who plays electric guitar, let's say most guitars. I suppose there are kids today, who play digital modelers who don't have any interest in playing through an old amp. And I can see the argument for that. I can see all that, but I think anyone who's going to ever play amps should know how to play their style of music or the styles of music through a Deluxe Reverb, because it is a common reference point. And in a perfect world would still be very common for backline, but it is an amp which you will find an awful lot of places, and if you can always sound good through Deluxe Reverb, you will be in a strong starting point. Hey, Clyde Broadway, you need 410s on the cheap for a 5F6. Eminence has got a Legend 1070 something, I don't remember. Anyway, they've got an Alnico Legend and they've got a ceramic Legend. The Eminence 10-inch Legends ceramic is a good choice. So is the Eminence little buddy. The Warehouse, what's it called? Green Beret 10 would also be a good choice. That's a ceramic 10 that's like a greenback. Those are all be really good, inexpensive choices. Of those, my nod would go in terms of installation to the WGS because the tabs on the connectors accept solder. Eminence tabs are really designed for quick connects and can be hard to solder to. If you go with the Eminence and you can't get it to stick, go in there with an emery board and rough up those connections, then clean them up with isopropyl, then tend them, and then you can solder to them just fine. But Eminences can be frustrating to solder to. They're good speakers. I'm not slamming them. It's just one of those things. But yeah, the Little Buddy, the Legend, or the I just said it, Green Beret 20s. Those would be my choice, my initial suggestions. There are others, but those are the ones I think you'd probably be pretty happy with. Hey, Robert. All right. I already recommended 4. I mean, there are so many speakers for the Deluxe Reverb reissue, or 12-inch speakers in general, and I don't know what you're going to like. And I don't remember what 4 I recommended last time, but I think probably the ET65, the G12C, the Alessandro SA, something that's an Eminence one, and maybe I said a Vintage 30 or the WGS Veteran 30. You can some guys will get away with the Celestion Alnico Blue, or you may prefer to go with the Celestion Alnico Gold for 50 watts handling. Or Weber has some nice sounding versions of that. You can get the Blue Dog or Silver Bell and 30 watts or 30 watts or 50 watts. And then there are all kinds of choices. I mean, there's guys out there who are going to swear by an EV or a JBL, but those tend to be very heavy, and it can be a kind of a crapshoot finding one that sounds the way you expect, especially in a Deluxe Reverb cab, which doesn't have much internal volume. But the most important thing with finding speakers for your amp, and this goes for any style, any amp, any genre, any player, is playing them yourself in the spaces that you'll be using them. It's a very subjective thing. You can say, hey, the following 10 speakers are all of a suitable quality. They're all going to last. They're all going to give a different kind of good sound, and they're all rated for the power coming out of that amp. Of them, which one do you like the most and why? You may surprise yourself. You may come out and say, hey, he suggested all those, then I tried this Eminence Wizard and it's just the tits. And the Eminence Wizard has its strong points. I think it's a little bit strident for most of the players I know, but some guys freaking love it. Hey, Sebastian, he's in Munich this time. Well, the Valve Wizard has got some great stuff. I'm glad it helped with your rectification questions. Hey, so you got the Soldano SLO30. I've not tried the new Soldanos. I'm old. I've only played the old 100s and 50s that Mike did back in the day. Cabin speaker recommendation depends on your budget, your size, how loud you need it to be. You can do a 1x12 or 2x12 or 4x12 or 4x10, whatever. 2x10. I would say probably to get the most out of the Soldano sound, you'd want a 2x12. Most guys are probably going to recommend a closed-back 2x12 with some depth to it, maybe 12 to 14 inches. And I'd say traditionally, probably the Vintage 30s would be a good choice. But again, like I said before, there's so many things. You may prefer it into an open back. You may you can do the Warren Haynes thing, like an open back 4x12 loaded with JBLs, assuming you've got someone to carry the damn thing for you and move it around for you. That's a great choice, but it's a very different sound from someone who wants a real punchy, overdriven sound. So play through as many things as you can and see what you think. And, there's lots of guys out there demoing Soldanos, and you can hear their rigs. Some of them might say, hey, here's it through the greenbacks, here's it through the Vintage 30s, here's it through the G12Hs, whatever. So it's like picking out a girlfriend for someone or picking out a boyfriend for someone. I don't mean to be sexist. Hey, to DeLucci. He's got a 65 deluxe reverb reissue. He gets distortion when he picks hard or gives more volume. So far, he's changed the power transformer, output transformer, chokes, and all tubes, replaced both screen. You shouldn't have changed all that. It's no longer a 65 deluxe reverb reissue, and you still are going to have that distortion when you pick hard because that's what it does. Depending on what guitar you have, a deluxe reverb reissue will tend to break up at 4 or 5 on the volume, and above that, you sound like Cheap Trick. That's not a fault of the amp. That's what it's designed to do. Sounds like you either needed a different amp or more speakers. If you run that same deluxe reverb into a 4x12 rather than a 1x12, you're going to have a lot more output volume. But, this is a clean amp right here. Amps do that. This is a 15-watt amp with a master volume, about 10 o'clock, so it doesn't blast and clip the mic through here. It's still plenty loud in the room, but as you just heard, hopefully, it still breaks up if I slam it, and that volume's on 9. That's a good, traditional, clean sound, but if you push it, it pushes it. Anyway, I'm afraid that you have done a lot of work for nothing. Hopefully, it's a really good sounding example, and depending on what transformers you used. But I'd be, if you had asked me or someone like me before you did all that, they'd say, well, if you're not getting enough headroom out of deluxe reverb reissue, that's why they invented the twin. I aim to please or to make people squirm. Either one works for me. What's my opinion on boutique amps like the Jens Ritter Encore tube amp starting at €36,000? He's a designer of guitars and basses. Well, I personally can't imagine any amplifier being worth $36,000, and that includes Dumbles and train wrecks and anything. That's ridiculous. They're just not that expensive. If Ritter's able to get that, more power to him, but that's a market, charging what the market will support. It's its own kind of special magic. My opinion on boutique amps varies by the amp and the builder. So there are good ones and there are bad ones and there are in-between ones, just like anything else. I don't have an opinion of boutique amps per se. From a certain perspective, that's what I do as well. I have seen a lot of horror shows. I have seen a lot of fantastic stuff. Remember, though, that Jim Marshall started off making a boutique copy of a Fender. The AC30 is kind of copying both a Gibson and a Fender Bassman. So Vox, from a certain point of view, started off as a boutique builder. Mike Soldano, from just a minute ago, he certainly started off that way. Bless his heart. Mesa Boogie, that Randall started off as a boutique tweaker of Princeton's. So, like I said, some of them I don't like at all, but it's not a one big basket where they're all equivalent. I have worked on a Bassman 50 master volume. I don't know how rare they are, but I don't see a lot of them. But I think they're just not that, they weren't that as popular as other models. Thanks for the super chat. I don't remember much about the Bassman 50 master volume. The thing about Fenders in the 70s and why some of them may be perceived as rare is they were changing the designs so much. When you look at the history of Fender, they were changing the design like 4 and 5 times for each model throughout the 50s. And then early 60s, and from 63, late 63, really in production, early 64, through 1968 are the classic blackface period. And then they started changing them, and some models didn't change that much, and other models changed every year or two. And so there are amps out there that were only made from 72 to the middle of 73, then they had a new bright idea, and they made a change, and so you have a rare amp. But they're all they all have the same DNA. There's only like you've got the from about 62 to 69 typically for most of the amps, and then some 73. You started making some changes in 70, and you get the wax boards in 73. And there's, so they have a lot of excess spaghetti. They start adding snubber caps. And then later in the 70s, they get into the master volumes and the push-pulls and the even the ultralinear stuff. But it's pretty much just three broad groupings of amps from 63 to 80 as far as what's happening electronically. So I don't worry about, it's a rare Fender Bassman 50. It's just a different version of the 70s Bassman. Hey, Cheese Pizza. They were talking about you yesterday on Brad's channel. Let's see. In the modern amp world, what is the way to go for a switchable function in a hand-wired amp like a Germino, boost, relays, optocouplers, microcontrollers? Thanks for sharing my knowledge. I prefer optocouplers, because there are some very, very high-quality optocouplers now that have the form factor of an op amp, and they run on 5 volts or lower. You can run them on like 3 volts. You can usually steal that from a heater supply without any downside, and you just switch it with a transistor so the foot switch isn't running audio out, and it has about a 3 millisecond time to go from lowest resistance to highest, and or vice versa, and you can configure them like two sides of a double pole, double throw switch, or a single pole, whatever you need to do. You can have it says 2 normally open, 1 normally open, 1 normally closed, both normally closed. You have a lot of options, and unlike a relay, you don't get bounce, and there's no point like in a relay where for just a split second there's no connection. There's always a connection. It's like moving a fader on a board, a mixing board. Like, hey, you want to hear the reverb? Bring that up. Want to not hear the reverb? Bring it down. In general, I prefer optocouplers. Microcontrollers, adding it to an existing build, it's possible, but I don't think it's really the most cost-effective way. And I'm not a big fan of microcontrollers, and even if they're designed from the get-go, because it's a lot of complication. And will that controller be obsolete within 3 years? There's still an issue with optocouplers having a lifespan. Any part has a lifespan, but the optocouplers is a much simpler thing compared to a microcontroller. And especially a lot of the stuff now with the DSP where you have to have a flash program, and will that still be made, et cetera. So relays are kind of like the most coarse version, and the old Vactrols are pretty coarse, but the modern optocouplers are really fantastic because you can just do a real simple transistor gate to turn them on and off, and you can control the timing, and they won't pop, and they don't have any significant current draw, and they're very small, which is all good things, and they can handle a lot of voltage across the point which is actually switched, though there are ways around that as well. Thank you, Greg G. Shiba dog dressed in traditional outfit waving Japanese fans. Yeah, if I were to scroll up on the actual thing from YouTube on the website, I would see the sticker. But here in the program I use to actually administer the thing, I just get the description. So Shiba dog dressed in traditional outfit waving Japanese fans. So domo arigato. Should you stay away from the EVH amps, 5150 versus Stealth versus Iconic? That's tough. None of them are built well. I've not been inside the Iconic yet. I've been inside the 5150 that Fender makes, and I've been inside the 5150 that PV made and the 6550 it makes now. I would say for the price, the EVH 5150 that Fender makes is really expensive garbage, and the MIDI implementation is really bad. I think their build quality is horrible. Put it this way, I've got a good friend who plays at a certain national level who is given some to use for a tour, and out of thanks to Fender for providing those for the tour, he had them on stage visible, but he had a different amp backstage because he couldn't trust the 5150s just to actually work every night. The Fender branded ones. I have put on the channel a lot of the PV ones. The main problem with the PV ones are that the heater supplies going to the 6L6s are running through a ribbon cable, and so there's a lot of current going through a 24 gauge wire, and it catches fire, and when that happens, it typically burns both boards at the point where the ribbon cable connects. So the fix for that, before it happens, is to disconnect those parts of the ribbon cable and run some wires from the secondary directly to the output tube board. That's kind of hacking it up. And they have a muting transistor that often fails. The long-term issue with the PVs is that they have some pots which are no longer readily available now that PV is shutting down its parts department. There's still some out there. You can buy them. If you have one, I would say buy all the pots and jacks for that model and have them on hand, because they're not going to be around in 5 to 10 years. And they do fail quite a lot. I'm not a fan of any of the 5150s. I think they are very inexpensively made Soldano copies. And you can be like Eddie and just use a Soldano. He also had one of those around behind the stage. I'd rather have a Friedman than any of those, but though I don't play that genre, but the Dave makes amps that do that same thing. I think you'd be happier at probably the Jerry Cantrell. Thanks, Bottom Kitchen. Hey, Billy Sims. Well, you still run the risk of the heater balance resistors burning the board if there's a short. So I typically remove that connection to the board entirely from the heater supply. I just move the heater secondaries to the octal socket, and then I install heater balance resistors at the board. Because if you do have a short involving the heater supply, those resistors typically will burn. And it's better for them to burn, half an inch, 3/4 of an inch up in the air over an octal socket rather than up against a PCB. So I have not had that happen. I have seen burn resistors like that in previous Fender reissues, and certainly in a lot of Marshalls, the 50 and 100 watt plexi reissues that Marshall has out. That's a very common failure mode. I can see around that particular corner, and it's just easier to put two 5-cent resistors up in the air on a tube socket. No, it's just on, and it's just detecting micro voltage in the air. If I were to move the leads, you see that fluctuate. That is zoomed in a lot. It's not to scale. If I had an actual signal present, if the signal was the size of the blue wavy line you'd see in the background, then I'd shut off the signal. That blue wavy line would be a flat line. It's just I thought it was a nice pop of color in the background, and something for you to stare at when you get tired of looking at my ugly face. I have in the past hooked up the mic to that so that it moves when I speak, but I don't want to run the cables all the way there. So. Hey, Curtis J. In general, 914s and 4148s are interchangeable. You could also use a 1N4001, I believe. It doesn't really matter that much. 2210 circuit switching is kind of terrible. There's the rectifier in that circuit. I believe off the top of my head, they take a AC heater and rectify it to do that, and you've got to use we use 1N4007s for that. Then they have some little ones in there just to help everything else out, and you can use a 14, you can use a 4148. I think you can use a 1N4001 for that as well, or 4002. It doesn't really matter. But if you have 4148s, it's fine. There are circuits where that matters, and that circuit is not one. Hey, Mid-Otter, is there such a thing as a master volume Princeton? There is, but would be kind of pointless. It's not a dumb idea. It just would be a lot of money spent to achieve nothing. For the same price, to have someone install a master volume properly in a Princeton, get something like this and just be happy. There's no shame in using pedals when necessary. You know, go watch. I mean, there's so many great players out there. Watch Tim. Drive me nuts. L.A. guy, really nice, black glasses, hat. Tim. Anyways, everyone's gonna be shouting at me in the comments. Can't remember his last name. Really nice guy. He uses pedals. 99% of what you hear him playing on his channel, just playing through a pedal. He's got amps that do the overdrive, but it's just faster for him with the setup to turn on a pedal. There's no shame. It's what your musical ideas are. Tim Pierce. Thank you, Jim Cox. Tim, if you see this, I'm sorry. I watch your videos from time to time. I like what you do. I do know your name. It's just in the pressure of doing a live stream, all these things go away. I'm sure you can relate. Hey, CJ Young, I would not change anything internal to a 69 Princeton as far as changing it for a speaker, because the signal coming out of a Princeton, the 10-inch is not reproducing everything that the Princeton's already doing. The 12-inch is a better shot of that. There are changes I like to make to Princeton's, but given the value of 69s now, I would not make any changes to those. I would make changes to a later 70s Princeton. I would make certain changes to, and I do make the changes to their issues to give them greater headroom and all that. But I think 72 is like my cutoff point. I think the classic era really ended in 72 when they went to the glued-in dado baffles, and then in 73 they started adding all the wax. 63 through 72 is a pretty good run for a classic period, and that's kind of where I'm like, I don't mod in that window. You'll see me do slight things, like I've added master volumes to some 65 and 66 basements, because I know that that's removing a speaker jack, not drilling the hole, and lifting two resistors, and they can all be put back. But there's no been anything major. There's no been. So I guess I saw James Bless there, and the other one is saying hello from Scotland, and I went a little Scottish on you. Sorry. There's no been. Nay. Hey, Glenn Jodlowski. I have nothing but respect for Mark Bartel. I have not heard any of those models. I have seen photos and fapped furiously to them. He does beautiful work, and I suspect from what I'm seeing that everything would sound fantastic, but I have not seen or played one in person, though I'd love to. Hey, James Underhill. There are individual amps I'd love to have. I'd love to have Edge's AC30 in. I'd love to have some of Page's Marshalls in, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the Gilmore stuff. I'd love to have those individual amps in to see what's been done and what makes them a little bit different. I don't really think about certain models. There are amps I dread ever get again. I don't want an Uberschall. I don't want any more of the clear plexiglass fronted the H&Ks, Hughes and Kettners ever again. Those are nightmares. But there's nothing I'm like, oh, my life would be so much better if I had, or ooh, wouldn't that be cool? To me, triodes are triodes, pentodes are pentodes, and they all operate the same way. And they either do that well or poorly in terms of models and designs. But there are individual amps out there that have some unique sounds. I'd like to verify some theories I have. What is my favorite circuit from Fender? The Telecaster, post 67. I don't really have a favorite Fender circuit. That's a little bit tricky because to me, every 60s Fender but the every 63 to 69 Fender, but the Bassman, the Champ, and the Princeton are the same circuit, and the Bassman and the Princeton have a lot of that same circuit in them. So there's only like 3 or 4 circuits that they did in that entire period, and depending on the transformers, the voltages, the amount of negative feedback, and the speakers, they were presented as different models, and they have different sounds as a result of all those very important things. But the circuit is pretty much the circuit. So as far as the favorite Fender circuit, it's got to be either the 5F6A or the AB763, but the 5F6A is also the 5E8. You know, it's also the twin of the same period. Just you want the 4x10 version, 45 watts, or the 80 watt 2x12. You know, I guess it would only be 45 watts 2x12. Yeah, sorry, low power twin. You know, so that's one circuit, and the AB763 is another circuit, and those are probably my favorite circuits. But that's like 12 different amp models, depending on what volume you need. Hope that sounds not dismissive. Let's see. Where did I lost? Oh, there it is. Okay. T777 says his 57 Champery issue is having issues again. Volume cuts out or decreases. 6v6s go microphonic in combos. It could be the 5Y3, it could be the 12Y7. It's rarely going to be the 5Y3 if the volume cuts out or decreases. If you see the pilot light fade in and out, then it might be something to it. But typically, if you have a problem with the 5Y3, you're going to have major problems. They don't tend to fluctuate. They tend to either be fine or they do little light shows and make horrible sounds and die. Volume cutting out or decreasing could be a tube. It could also be a bad solder joint. It could also be a dirt on a pot. Without having your amp here, I can't tell you more specifically. But you know, JJs are a good choice. I would not get JJ 6v6s, as I've said in a lot of the videos. I find that they just go very microphonic in combos very quickly. Now they've got a new double microspace JJ 6v6 that I've not tried. Tube Depot doesn't stock that. They stock the 6v6S, and the 6v6S doesn't really sound like a 6v6. It sounds like a 6L6. It's just a smaller 6L6. But hey, if you have one and you like it, that's great. I'm not saying you're wrong. It would not be my choice for various reasons. Thank you, Lucian. Appreciate that. Bartell amps have an interstage transformer. Is there any benefit? Well, yeah. You're going to have, in theory, fewer artifacts. Yeah, it's going to be, depending on the quality of the transformer, you're going to have the signal coming in is now the signal going out, only it's inverted and all that fun stuff, and without any added distortion. It's an idea that Fender did on the Bassman 10s and such, but it wasn't done that well back in the day. I bet Mark's doing it really well. I think those amps are going for clean. But until I have one in front of me, both to look at, see what's going on and to play it and get a sense of it. It's all theoretical praise for Bartell, but you can tell a lot about how an amp is designed by the way it's built. Or at least if you've been doing this for a long time, you can. Magisterium says a booster, overdrive, and a chorus for cleans. I don't like chorus anymore. I used to, and I can do a chorus sound with the delays. I'm trying to find a good delay pedal. I had one that I thought was going to be the trick, but it had such a high self noise. It was a digital, and I don't want to shame the company because they were very gracious and tried to work with me to resolve the issue. But the noise floor was just so high, and so many digital pedals have got a hiss and a whine no matter what power supply you use. And I use some very nice, expensive isolated supplies. I tried 4 different very expensive isolated supplies to be sure there was nothing going on my end. And it is very difficult to get a digital effect that does not have that. The Strymon Flint has that, and I do use that occasionally. I've got a string of videos on the channel on that subject. So I'm still looking for a really nice delay that makes me happy, that doesn't have that whine. And any of the delays that I choose would also be able to do a chorus sound. But I think a small handful of overdrives and a delay and a reverb for amps that don't have reverb would probably cover the bases. I might just add the reverb in post, since most of the time I'm using a mic for that stuff. We are coming up on the hour. In just a minute, we're going to take our first 7-minute intermission, and I'm going to switch from this beer to iced coffee. Iko Lazowski, hi from Macedonia. Wow, that's. I spent so much time reading Greek mythology when I was a kid. My mind's a little bit blown that you're watching from Macedonia. Thank you very much. Thank you. My favorite guitar speaker. There are three. The one that you hear the most often on my channel, because it's in my shop cab, and of the 2 speakers in that shop cab, it's the one that I usually put the mic on. The WGS Warehouse Guitar Speakers ET65. If an amp doesn't sound good through that, there's something wrong with the amp. Now, for particular styles, there may be better choices for individual players, but that is a really good baseline. Tells me what an amp sounds like, from low end to high end to mids, all that stuff. I love that speaker. The Celestion G1265 Creamback is also fantastic and is a very similar speaker in a lot of ways. Those are probably my favorites. And then third place would go. I'm gonna give it a split decision. I'm going to say the Celestion Alnico Blue 15-watt speaker, because that's the one most people can get, specifically the British versus the Vietnamese version. But my real choice would be from 65 and later, the silver version. I've heard from some people that they are the same as the blue with different paint job. I've heard that they changed the cone. I've heard that they changed the voice coil. I've heard that there's a slight change in the magnets, 20 watts versus 15. I don't know. But of the 60s Celestions I've played, there's been a lot of differences throughout. Consistently, I tend to prefer the silver ones to the blue ones. The blue ones are prettier, but those are also speakers I would not recommend for most people with most amps, because they're expensive and relatively fragile and only 15 watts. I think right now I'm going to bask in the glory of having someone join us from Macedonia, which is just fantastic. And we're going to take that 7-minute intermission, and we will all come back in just a few. So stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee, do what you need to do. Let's see, where's the thing I'm supposed to turn on? I always forget to do that. I'm supposed to do all that stuff on every stream. So that, at the beginning, we had the very inexpensive casino. This sadly was not as inexpensive, but it's been a dream guitar of mine for many decades. So I thought I'd give you guys a quick comparison of the two, if I can remember which button to push. So, same amp, same settings, same overdrive pedal. For those of you who saw the review I did of the stock casino pickups, this guitar was much brighter with these pickups than the stock casino pickups, and the new Fralins, as P90 should be, are a good bit brighter than this, but this still works quite well. So it makes me quite happy that both my cheap Epiphone and my not cheap Gibson sound really good together. They complement each other very well. It's a shame they're so ugly. And my SG likes them too, but it's kind of the skinny kid sister of both the big boys. Let's see here. Where were we? Hey, yeah, Gooden. My business name failed your test. Certainly, I chose Psionic Audio, which no one can spell or pronounce. Though I suppose the guy from Macedonia has a head start on the rest of you. Thank you, Mr. Lazowski. The P is silent. Psi. It's a bad pun on sonic audio, but it kind of loosely means mental energy. Thanks, DJ. Play nice. I appreciate you boosting the algorithm. Hey, Michael Kidd, glad you caught one live. I'm personally very delighted to be live. Every day it's more and more of a surprise. Hey, Bebop. Yeah, Mojitone's got 100 microfarad, 100 volt cap in the bias supply versus the Fender 25 microfarad. What would the effect be? You'd have more filtering, so you'd have less noise. Also 100 volt. I believe the Fender has a 50 volt. So yeah, I would recommend a 63 volt or 100 volt. I typically do 50 microfarad or 47 microfarad versus the 100, but 100's fine. Basically, you want to have as little filtering in a bias supply as you can get away with. And if you need more, it's better to add it in stages, as I've shown in some of the Fender videos of late where I added an additional cap. Because when you have a capacitor in a circuit like that, there's a rise time. It takes a certain amount of milliseconds for that to charge up. And you always want the bias voltage to be present before there is any screen or plate current on a power tube. So you would want the bias to come up as quickly as possible and then have the power tubes catch up to it. You don't want to have the power tubes power on and the bias be late. It's really not that common an issue, but best practice is to use as little filtering in the bias supply as suffices to remove ripple. The 100 is fine, by the short answer. The Mojitone circuit is better than the original Fender. Jim B asks, is the Fender Super Reverb a louder, more headroom deluxe? In terms of the stock circuit, it is. But it is also going to have different compression characteristics due to larger transformers, and it has different voltages throughout. It has a 1K and a 4.7K for dropping resistors between stages versus the 10K and 10K of a deluxe reverb. So you're getting a very different feel to the power supply, a slight difference in the filtering, not terribly, but slight. The transformers make a huge difference, and the biggest difference, of course, is 4x10 with a 1.5-inch voice coil celestial, CTS Alnicos that you get with the most. That's the best choice for super reverb is the 10-inch Alnico CTS, because those are the best 10-inch Alnico speakers ever made. You don't get that with a deluxe reverb, especially since most deluxe reverbs just had an Oxford. If you plug a deluxe reverb, if you could plug your deluxe reverb into the speaker cab of a super reverb, you would have closer to a 22-watt super reverb sound. The speakers make a huge difference, but the load difference is too great. That 2-ohm load of the super reverb cab is too great a load for the deluxe reverb, which is expecting 8. Can kind of handle 4, but 2 is too big a leap, and the 6v6s would not behave correctly with that load. But as far as the circuit itself, the circuit on the board is identical, though the super reverb adds a switchable bright cap and adds a mids pot. It's not off topic. People asking questions about speakers, Neil. Yeah, the G12C is a great speaker. Historically, it's not the right choice for a 5E3 clone because it is a copy of the Jensen C12N, which is the mid-60s Fender sound. But if you like the sound, it's great. You're not going to have much compression from that speaker. You're going to have a lot of clarity in the mids. You're going to have a lot of upper end extension without it being painfully bright. And you're going to have quite a lot of low end for a 5E3. So if that's what you're going for, it's great. Yeah, I agree. 36K, I think they missed the decimal. 3.6K is a little more realistic. I'd say 5 to 7K at the very highest as far as being what an amp is inherently worth. Tuolucci, so that's your deluxe. Well, none of what you're describing now would typically be transformers. I imagine a good tech could sort you out. I can't do anything remotely without having your amp in front of me. Sorry. Why do I prefer my amp when it's running a 4-ohm load? Nicholas VAS. I don't know what amp you have, so I can't answer that. If you have a mismatch can change the behavior of the output tubes as far as the compression and the picking response, the transient response. It will also often give you about a 3 dB decrease in output volume, so you may be able to turn the amp up a little bit more. As long as it's a safe mismatch, but without knowing what amp you have, I can't tell you. How do I feel about Sam Ash closing down? I don't. I don't have Sam Ash here. I've never had Sam Ash here. The industry's in a tough point, and brick and mortar is a real tough investment. I mean, look what happened to Sears. So, I think in any industry when there's a shift in how things are bought and sold, people who cling to the previous model too hard can suffer. But I am not the person to ask about that kind of stuff. If I were the kind of person to ask, I would not be sitting here talking to you guys on this beautiful Saturday. I'd be out on my goddamn yacht. Bebot, that's cool. What'd you get? Got a new sold his Mesa Maverick and got a new guitar. Cool. Hey Chris, the 3 nanofarad coupling cap is fitting your reverb. That's the plate that goes to your reverb pot. Is it microphonic in use or just when you tap on the damn thing? Because when you're actually playing the damn thing, you're rarely going to be, it's not going to be the same thing. You're just going to get a little bit of that microphonics when you tap on it, when it's sitting there. It's just going to be a little bit of occasional air when playing. So it's not inherent with the circuit, but you could have a bad solder joint too. And I don't know which Vichet you used. I use Vichet 562Rs, which are less likely to be ceramic, and there's some others which are more likely. And if you want something which gives not going to have any ceramic, but not going to have any microphonics, but you want ceramic, look at the multi-layer stuff from Kemet and Murata, or use a film cap. It doesn't matter as much for the reverb driving thing, the reverb recovery stage. Recommended time for standby switch. If you have an amp which needs standby, wait until you've maybe 30 seconds to a minute, typically. It's just that initial power on stage where you don't want to have the output tubes cold because the B plus will be higher than the caps can be rated for. So 30 seconds typically is enough for there to be some current draw from the output tubes. You can go if you have an amp with 6550s, give it a minute or two. But typically a pair of 6L6s, a pair of EL34s, 30 seconds to a minute. You'll figure it out. Hey, Gary Bertolo. I'm glad you enjoyed that, the chairman video. Yeah, that was with Mason from Vertex and his compadres. That was an interesting one because I thought we were going to talk about small amps and what's on the market. And they steered me more towards talking about effects loops. And I can talk about most of these subjects, but I don't feel that we delivered on what was promised in that video, a discussion of small amps and good choices and stuff. So maybe we'll get back on there and finish that chat someday. Hey, Chris Hanline. Yeah, he was wondering if there's something to pay particular attention to while doing the Fromel upgrade on a mid-2000s Fender Hard Rock Deluxe. Yeah. All right. This is my trash can. If it's right here, and I take the Fromel kit and I drop it, it just goes straight down. So that's easy. But if the trash can's 10 feet away, I've got to calculate the arc that the Fromel kit takes to get to the trash can because I don't want it anywhere else. I want it to go right in the trash can. So if you're really good at physics or basketball, get your arc and just like that. If you're just starting to this and the trash can's over there, get up and walk across the room. So you just drop it straight in. Or if you're really new at all this, put your hand down in the trash can before you let go. Because the Fromel mods are not upgrades. They are orange drop caps with lead diameters that are much larger than the holes that exist in the PCB of that amp. And everyone who installs that butchers their board. The problems the Hot Rod Deluxe have are known and they are fixable, and I've shown you how to fix them, and Brad's shown you how to fix them, and a lot of techs have shown how to fix them. None of them are solved by the Fromel mod. The Fromel infuriates me because it makes people waste their money and damage their gear because they're trying to solve actual problems. Those amps have real problems. Fromel doesn't fix any of them, and if you want your amp to be fixed, look at the 100 Hot Rod videos I've got on my channel. And I'm not selling you my services, and I'm not selling you a kit. I'm just telling you what goes wrong with the amps and how to have them fixed, none of which involve destroying all the pads by installing 630 volt rated orange drops with larger diameter leads. Vibrochamp build, Random Stuff 77 says, scratchiness on volume and tone pots, popping from speaker at high volume and playing low notes of chords. Thoughts or suggestions? Doesn't have the 330 picofarad cap on 6v6. Well, first of all, you got DC on your volume and your tone pots. If you're building it from scratch, that'd be relatively unusual. Popping from a speaker at high volume and playing, you should not have popping from the speaker. You've got bad solder joints throughout that. Without having your amp in front of me or clear photos, I cannot tell you specifically. I can tell you based on what you're saying, stop. Take it to a tech, ask them to fix it. Ask them if you can watch them fix it, or if they can at least give you a written report of what it took, because there are steps that you got either missed, got wrong, or skipped. And I'm not trying to be mean, but the problems you're describing there are not one little thing. I mean, it may be one little thing, but it's one crucial little thing that I cannot tell from your question what that little thing might be. Hey, Jason Widener. I have gotten away from using VVRs and AC30s or other amps in general because while they work, and they can work very well, I have no confidence that they will work very well for a very long period of time, because they turn the excess energy that you're not going to use for voltage and hence output of the amp into heat. And no matter what I've done using very highly rated IRFs and other MOSFETs, and paralleling them and having heat sinks, thermal paste, and all this stuff directed the chassis to heat sinks mounted to the chassis, I've had failures which were not predictable. And while they are inexpensive to repair, you got to change that MOSFET out again. Unless everyone lives in this town who I do it for, in which case they bring it in, I'll change it out once every 3 years. I cannot continue to do that because people would then be in Canada and Wisconsin and Florida, and that $4 MOSFET died after 4 years, and it makes me look bad. So I have gone just to doing really good installations of post-phase inverter master volume, because the parts count is low. There is no heat, and they tend not to fail at all. So while on paper the VVR can be great, there are also some other issues depending on the complexity of the amp. If you have a fixed bias amp, you have this other issue. And then if you're just doing if you either need to scale the whole thing so it doesn't really behave the same as you turn the scaling down, or you just scale the phase inverter through the output tubes, in which case as you turn the B plus down for the phase inverter and output section, the B plus wants to rise to the preamp, so then you have to do a clamping circuit, and then you'll have a whole bunch of complication. I think all those complications and all the heat issues, it is an interesting thing, but not something I would recommend anymore, and I don't offer it anymore myself. Ratchets or nut drivers? Ratchets typically, because nut driver, I don't have any manual control over that. If you mean like versus a nut driver instead of, I've got a standard power screwdriver, but it's not a impact ratchet thing, Unless you're just asking whether I use a ratchet or just a little handheld nut driver. I use both, and a lot of times I'll start by holding the socket, and then to finish it I'll attach it to the ratchet, or I'll start loosening with the ratchet, and then I finish by hand. I guess I misunderstood the question. I don't ever use impact drivers, if that's anyone's questions. Hey, Vincent G. He's got a classic 50. His lovely head has become mid-heavy, harsh, and honky, and brittle sounding. Any advice on solutions? Well, the good news is the filter caps tend to last a long time in the classic 30s and classic 50s. PV used a higher quality line of IC brand caps than Fender does. PV did. The two things that happen the most often in the classic 50, they have some 5-watt ceramic resistors, the cement resistors that can overheat the board, and you can have bad connections at pots. And they have a really strange thing happening, and I'm trying to remember where it is in the circuit. I think it's in the bias supply, where they have two little tiny resistors in series with each other, and they burn up. And if they have begun to burn but have not burned open yet, you could have weird sounds like that. But I think you need to take it to a tech, because all those things are almost every tech who's been doing this for 10 years plus has worked on many classic 50s. The only downside to classic 50s is sometimes if you do need to recap them or change something, there's so much old brown glue on everything. It can be mechanically difficult. But most of us have learned how to use a heat gun and freeze spray and alcohol to get rid of that stuff. Hey, Rob, I'm not doing the work through Martin Music anymore at this time. I've been taking stuff in directly. I'm not sure that I would want to take in a super redhead. The SWR stuff hasn't lasted very long. And a lot of the transistors that they used are very difficult to get these days. Shoot me an email, and not right now, but maybe in a few months, I'd be glad. I'd look at it for you at least and give you a diagnostic. But I am so in the weeds with work. I've just had like 4 more Fenders dropped off in the past couple of days. So it'd be a while before I could get to it. But shoot me an email. If you're in Memphis, I'll give you my phone number and all that fun stuff. I try not to put my phone number out into the world because the phone rings all the time. But anyone who I'm doing work for does get my number. Hey, Vincent Ross. The beer was Abita Amber from New Orleans. Hey, I'm not a big fan of the YGM3s. In fact, I'm an anti-fan of the YGM3 based on the ones I've had in. I've had some trainer heads tell me I'm wrong for that, but I've also had others say that the early YGM3 was a very good amp, and it's the later ones that are not, and those are the ones that apparently I've had. It sounds like you're describing one of the later ones. I would certainly recommend the AC15C1 over the YGM3. Now, I love the Bassmasters and some of the other trainers I've had, but the YGM3 has always been, everyone I've had in, which is only like 3 or 4, not serious amps. I don't want to belabor the point, but play each one and see what you think. The YGM3 can be made good. The AC15 Custom, the AC15C, is a good amp already, though the stock tubes in them often are not great. And if the input jacks are loose, they can be noisy. So those are very inexpensive things to fix, though. Hey, James Bless, thank you very much. Captain Grumpus says, volume pedal will suffice as master volume. If you have an amp with an effects loop and you have a low impedance volume pedal, yeah, you can use it as a master volume. That's a trick a lot of people use with, say, the Hot Rod or Blues DeVille. But high impedance volume pedal won't be as good in an effects loop. If you mean in front of an amp, that's not really master volume. It's just limiting the signal feeding the input. But I've done my time playing into various single channel amps using master volume and turning it up when I want distortion and turning it down when I want to go by my clean channel. So not the same thing as a master volume, but still a useful thing to have. Hey, Sebastian. On the Mercury homepage, there are 2 sets for replacement transformers from AC30, Woden or Albion-like. They have more than that. If you go to the actual AC30 page, they got the Woden, they got the Albion, they got the Haddon, they got the Parmico, and then they have reissues of the reissue, new versions of the reissue ones. I've got a video on the channel where a 63 AC30 came in and it had a Woden, and I don't remember if the other one was a Haddon or an Albion, but it came in with 2 63 output transformers. One was a Woden, the other one I think was a Haddon. And I hooked them each up and played the same thing through each one. You can hear it. There is a subtle difference in character. In person, which notes wanted to feed back on the guitar were slightly different. When listening back to the recording, it was less apparent. But those are both very good transformers. As a tech, I prefer to use the Mercury Haddon, because the Haddon has the secondaries and primaries are going to internal tag connectors inside the transformer, and then bits of wire are soldered to that, so the leads coming out as primary and secondary are separate from the actual wire going wound around the iron. Whereas on the Woden, on the primary, the wires coming out of the primary are actually the copper wires that are wound throughout the transformer, and they're much harder to dress and solder and tin. So I will use either, but I much prefer working with the Haddon from a lazy perspective. What non-reverb Princeton would I suggest purchasing, or something similar? I'll get the Princeton Reverb. That's a great sound. I'm not sure if any companies out there are making a non-reverb version of the Princeton, because people are going to want the reverb. If you don't want to pay for an original, but you want to get something better than the reissue, then look into what's the company? Headstrong. And then Carr has got some really nice amps that are very similar in a lot of ways. I think Top Hat does as well, but I think they all have reverb. The non-reverb Princeton was never been that popular an amp, and the difference is it's just very clean. You can get a reverb Princeton and just stick a 5751 in one or two spots and have pretty much the same thing. But I like the reverb. I think the reverb makes that amp. I don't have any mods for the current DSL amps because I don't think the board layout promotes modding them without. For the money it would take me to mod a DSL and do it properly, I'd rather get a better amp to begin with. The DSL is a good jack of all trades amp for not very much money, and that's what it is. And if it works for you the way it is, that's great. If you wish it were if X or Y or Z, it's not the right amp for you. And I don't mean to be dismissive, but when an amp is built like that, they built it to be inexpensive to build, and there are not a lot of changes that you really want to make to it because you're going to get diminishing returns for your money. Personally, I mean, I'd rather have two different amps. I'd rather have a dirty amp and a clean amp, or for some gigs, a clean amp and a couple different kinds of overdrive pedals. But for those who need to have, say, three channels, three different sounds out of one amp with a mastered volume, and but still 40 watts, so it's loud enough for every gig, the DSL is great for most people, but it won't do any one of those particular sounds, to me, truly excellently. It's just a very usable thing. I answer which Friedman would be better for a fusion type guitarist. I would contact Dave and ask what he thinks. But when I think of fusion guitarists, I don't think of the Friedman BE sounds. Most of the fusion players that I've listened to, I think more of a Robin Ford kind of thing, a little smoother. But I don't listen to Frank Gambale, and I don't listen to the Yellow Jackets, so that's not my world. But if you're interested in Friedman, call Dave Friedman. He'll tell you what his clients prefer, and you can tell him, hey, what records do you love? If you love Frank Gambale, if you love Return to Forever, he can steer you in the right direction. Hey, Jolly Bobby Yoger. Bobby Yoger. I don't keep up with the bass amp world. From what I have seen, I would still be tempted just to get a Sans amp, either pedal or rack preamp, and then maybe a 1,000-watt solid-state power amp, and then just use that as my rig and look into a cab that I like the sound of, maybe Epiphany. But if I wanted to buy something that was a dedicated bass amp setup, I think Aguilar's got some really good choices. The Aguilar stuff is Class D, so it's probably ice modules. They've got a pretty good warranty, I believe, and they're inexpensive, like $500-600 for the heads. So if in 3 or 4 years the ice module needs to be replaced, it's probably $120. I think that's probably a really good choice, and they sound good, and they're compact and lightweight. But I'm still, back when I was in that world, I had a Sans amp. I think I had the RBI or the PSA. I don't remember which. It was the rack-mounted one. I think it was the RBI, and I had not QVC. That's the home shopping thing. Q something power amp like you'd have for a PA, and I used it. I think it was dual 500. I used it bridged in mono because I only needed mono. I didn't always use it. Sometimes I used it just the 500 watts, but a lot of times I'd have it full 1,000 watts because clean headroom's nice. And I had a PV 2x12. I had two PV 2x12s that I really liked the sound of, but that was a long time ago. I had the Nova Delay Richard Morgan, and it died after about 6 months. Frustratingly, it just started to go bzzz, and it was unfixable. Hey, Edward Jones, thank you. Or Johns. I have not. I know nothing about silk tone amps, so if I ever see one, I will feature it. Thank you very much. I think the Epi makes me very happy. Hey, Dave, I've got maybe 3 or 4 Rivera. I'm sorry, not Rivera, but the Rivera concerts. I have however many videos I did on that one concert that I changed. I'm not ever doing that again. It would have been cheaper for me to build an amp for the guy. There's just so many things with the Rivera era concert that need to be fixed. I won't do it again. I recommend not. They were really badly built by Fender. This is not Paul's fault. Paul just did the designs, but they were built so poorly, and I'm not a fan of any of the improvements they made in that era of Fender, and I just wouldn't do that. So however many videos I did on that, 2 to 4, that's what I've got. There won't be any more. Hey, David Rosa. I've spoken a lot about speakers in the last hour. I don't love the Express Plus 525 either, but the C-Rex I find very C-Rex kind of a muted, slightly dark speaker. I'm not a fan of it, but like I said I gave a lot of suggestions about speakers last hour, but the punchline is, as always, play as many as you can yourself. Oh, I don't like the V3 Ampeg. The Ampeg V oh wait, that's not the SVT3. That's a V3. I've never had a Japanese Ampeg V3. I thought I was expecting the SVT Pro 3, whatever, which is the 3 and 4 give me nightmares on the SVT. Hey, Tom K1TL. Yeah, I've got the Veteran 30 on the bottom of my shop cabin, the ET65 up top, and the combination in the room is fantastic. But when I play around with close miking, I find the ET65 is usually the more interesting sound. I've got 2 mics I use for the real playing videos. Maybe next time I'll put one on 57 on one of the speakers and the Royer on the other, and do a panning thing. Let's see. Edge of Eternity 101. I was wondering if you ever mix pot values for volume and tone. What do you mean? For guitar or amps? I use a lot of pots, and I change values. I'm not sure what your question is. Try that again more specifically. Sorry. Jim B., I'm not a fan of any 80s Fender tube amps, Some of the solid state amps in the late 80s were kind of cool, but I think they lost their way during the 80s. And some of the late 80s, early 90s tube amps, the stuff, the Tone Masters and Vibro Kings, absolute garbage. Anything Steve Zinke did, bad. Hey, Gringo Pig. That's like 3 guys from Scotland, man. His P-Bass doesn't have a tone knob. Well, is it then not a P-Bass? Would I need one if I have a JHS color box? I don't know what the color box does. I mean, it's a preamp with a parametric EQ. A parametric EQ is a cool thing to have, but it doesn't work the same way at all as a passive tone circuit. I'll show you why. I'm not using the P-Bass, but I'll do it with this 335. Here's something that is not very well understood by most guitarists, and it's what a parametric cannot do, and an EQ inside the amplifier cannot do, but a passive circuit can do. Let me get this up where you can see it. I put it up on the desk for you guys. All right, so on the neck pickup, I've got the tone all the way up. If I roll the tone circuit back all the way, that not only rolls off the highs, but it shifts what's the best way to put this? There's a shift in the frequency that's boosted from the pickup. So it's not, let me see if I can do this on the screen. It's not like it goes up like this. You know, it's not like the frequency goes like this and then rolls off all the highs. The frequency goes like this and then bumps up at the moment you roll off. So if your roll off is here, there's actually a frequency increase. I'll do it the other way. A frequency increase here and then goes back towards flat. And as you roll the tone down, which is this way, that frequency moves around, and so you get the woman tone for clean stuff. If I turn on an overdrive, so even at clean stuff, you get exactly, Thomas K. It's a resonance peak that shifts around. So you get a boost, which can, especially when playing through overdrive, gives you that woman tone thing where it's like, oh, that's cool. It sounds like it's getting louder there. But even with a bass, that's part of the sound for clean stuff. If you want to do like Sly and Robbie stuff, some reggae stuff, you want to do the Stax thing, you want to do the Motown thing. There's a difference between taking a parametric and shelving all the highs, just shelve everything above 1K, or doing it in the amplifier versus rolling off the tone control on a P-bass. The response changes, the liveliness of the instrument changes. And so, you know, I don't think, if you have a P-bass that doesn't have a tone knob, I don't think you have a P-bass. Now, that said, I've got a very good friend who's a fantastic professional bassist. He's probably playing on stage at Madison Square Garden tonight, and he never touches the tone and volume on his bass. But I guarantee you that if someone said, "Hey, give me some Duck Done," he would do it. He knows how it's done. He knows how to do all that stuff and the Swampers stuff. But he chooses to run wide open, and he sounds pretty good when I have heard him play in front of 35,000 people. So these are a technician's perspective, but I'm also a musician. But I'm not going to put myself on Andy's level. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate that. Let's see. Oh, wow. Brian H. is from Tbilisi, Georgia. I have not. I've only heard good things about Amplified Nation, but I have not had one in front of me or seen inside it. I hope that they are wonderful. They seem to be well built from what I've heard, but I'm not. I don't have an opinion on them until I actually have one or hear one and play one. Hey, Lefty Mike. That Fryette video, yeah, he was so mad at me because he dropped that video about reforming caps. And then, like, the next day I had a video out saying that reforming caps is absolute bullshit and it should never be done. And it's not real because you cannot wet the electrolytic again. And he did another one of his videos while drinking martinis attacking me for saying that. And I'm not going to get into that with Steve because if you look at his video, he says a couple of important things before he does it. First of all, he says he wouldn't do this if this were an amp that were going on the road on tour for a pro player. It is his amp at home. Second of all, he was assuming all the risks. He knew what the risks are, and he took on those risks. And am I at 3 or C? I can't remember where I started with alphabetically or numerically. He knows what the warning signs are. He knows, oh, that's beginning to hum. I need to check that before it explodes, because they will explode. They can explode. They can catch fire. They can cause a lot of damage. So he's a professional tech, knows what to look for, knows how to do it himself. He's assuming all the risk for himself, and it's not being used on tour, on stage anywhere. And he specifically said in his video that if this were for a client who was going to go out and play, he wouldn't do it. Every amp that I do, I assume is going out on the world tour and needs to be ready to play every night and not blow up. So I can't reform a cap and send it out there and hope that the damn thing doesn't catch on fire, because if it does, I won't look very good and I would be liable, and I'd be out money and damage my reputation. There is no such thing as reforming a cap. You cannot wet the electrolytic. You can verify that it's not imminently going to catch on fire, and you can verify that the hum is not bad yet. And you just know that, hey, this thing has not failed yet. That's all they're doing. And they're bringing it up slowly to make sure that there's not any point where it starts to draw too much current. And Steve Fryette said that he would not do that for one of his pro clients, and he was assuming all the risk himself. And I think that has been, that video has not done guitarists much of a favor, but I'm not going to get into arguing with Steve Fryette through an exchange of videos or even in this format. If he wants to call me, we'll talk about it. We'd probably end up finding a point where we agree with each other. I have a lot of respect for Steve Fryette. And, there are a lot of things that I could do on my amplifiers and risks I could take that I would not ever expect a client to take. Like, I'm not going to recap that AC30 because I figured I'll know when it's about to go. And yeah, I think the voice coil is about to die on that Celestian Blue, but it's a kind of a cool sound. I'm gonna see how long it goes. I can do that for myself if I want to. I'm not gonna do that for people who pay me to make their amps work. Let's see. Sebastian says, I'm aware to realize a volume boost on an amp, you have to take away something in normal mode to add it back in boost mode. What's the way to go? You can do it post-phase inverter master volume. You can do it pre-phase inverter master volume. You can do it in variable voltage. You can do it with attenuation in preceding stages, depending on where how the gain structure's working. There's not one best way to do it. The way I typically would do it for people would be to have either a master volume which can be switched out, or two master volumes, one of which gets switched out. In which case you set your if you only have one master volume, set the amp to your loudest level, and then set your rhythm level with that master volume, or you could have two different master volumes. You can set level A, level B, and switch between them. What I have done for clients in the past is doing this for amps which have a high quality, low impedance effects loop, is I will do it in a box you put in the effects loop, which works like a programmable master volume. I called it the Lumos. So it's a volume pot. You run it in the master volume. With it off, you set your loudest level with the master volume that already exists in the amp, and then you turn it on and then you adjust the level of the pot till you get your rhythm level. Then That's where that did that. And that worked really well for very modern amps with clean power sections and low impedance effects loops. There's no one best way to do it. Hey, thank you, Matthew Del Sandro. I appreciate that. An older JMJ TB30. I'm not sure that I've ever had the JMJ TB30. What is a JMJ? Is that one of the people? Is that one of the various after-Vox alternate companies, or is that some era of Vox when they were owned by a vacuum salesman for 6 weeks? You know, Vox had so many different iterations. I'm not familiar with that amp off the top of my head. Sorry. I'm seeing a few questions being repeated, and if you're watching this out there, remember, you only have to ask the question once. When I come to it, I will answer it. I'm not skipping any questions. And if I skip one, it's because it was dumb, and I'll let you know. But I've not skipped any yet. I don't think about using silver bearing solder because it's not really of any benefit for what I do. I run a fan in here, but I don't run a fume extractor. I'm not that worried about it. Life is fatal. If I were to do all that, all I'd have is a very noisy environment that I hated to be in and probably get hit by a bus. I'm not anyone's role model. I don't pretend to say, use your solder fume extractors and hoods and everything, and do everything right. Make me look bad, please. Do everything I do it better than I do. That's that. If I retire in 20 years and everyone out there is doing it better than I ever did, and they've got all this stuff and all the ducks in a row and using solder made of bubble gum and bunny dreams, that's great. I'm down in the fumes. Let's see. I like the Blue Pup at Edward Johns, as long as the amp is suitable wattage for that speaker, and you like the sound of speakers are subjective. The Blue Pup is one of many really good choices. I like them. Thank you, Neil F. I appreciate that. Well, we are almost to the second intermission. I'm going to see if I've got another one of those Abitas. Maybe I'll have that drink on you. Hey, Rob F., have a good time with your beautiful wife. The rest of us did. Sorry. I'm much more of a smart-ass in person than I pretend to be online, but, Brad gets to let his hair down. He let his hair down so far, he tripped on it and it fell off. But I try to maintain some level of decorum on here, and occasionally I forget. Thanks, Matt Johnson. Yeah, that 335 is a nice sounding guitar. I'm very pleased with it. James Blessed, it's not a stupid question, but I've talked about standby a lot. I've got some videos dedicated to it. So go to my channel and look up in the search bar, put standby. And you'll see some of those videos because it's a 20-minute video. It'd be a 20-minute answer right now. I see a Magisterium. Let's see. I have tried the stuff with silver. It costs a lot more, and it doesn't give me any benefit to my work. David Treaster, I do not like the C-Rex. I think the C-Rex sounds better than the C12K, so people try the C-Rex and think that they have found the magic speaker for the Deluxe Reverb reissue because they had a C12K before. But I think this C-Rex sounds as much better than the C12K as almost anything else does over the C-Rex. But some people will like the C-Rex. That's fine. I am not familiar with Sam Amp, Shaolin Wolf, so I don't have any thoughts on his implementation of a master volume. Yeah, people have been talking about this. I haven't looked for that video yet. Uh, Lamps as resistive loads is nothing new. Um, Andy Marshall. Sorry if you see this, Andy. It's like Tim Pierce earlier. So many things you have to remember when you're doing this live. Andy Marshall at THT used to use that same kind of trick for the master volume on the THT univalve and bivalve. So it was not only worked really well, but it's kind of cool. If you played really hard, the light would flash. The light would light up in sync with how you played as you turn the output level down. So it's nothing new. I don't know what SamAmp is doing, if it's at all different, but it's not a new thing. And they're just choosing. Okay, so Lenny's Brown Tooth says they're adding different ones in series. So maybe it's depending on how much reduction that they want, they put more and more in series. I don't see any problem with it in theory, as long as the bulbs aren't going to die. Um, and that you can still get the incandescent bulbs. I bought like 10 boxes of number 47 lamps, incandescent lamps for the Fenders, because I fully expect in a few years they're all going to be gone. We have to use the LED versions, which are fine, but the color so far is not quite the right color. They'll get it, but incandescents are going away. I don't have any thought, Curtis Everett, on your HD 130 tremolo. I'd have to have the amp. There are amps I know really well. If you ask me a question about a deluxe reverb, ask me a question about a Marshall lead, AC30, G12A, GA18T. I know a lot of amps without even having to look in the schematic. The HD 130 is one of the ones I have to look at the schematic each time. So I don't have any magic tricks for you. Sorry. I think we're about to get to this. About to get to the next break. I think right now people are replying to each other while I was taking the first break. Let's see. Do I have a good recommendation for building an old Fender circuit for a Motown P-bass sound? Well, the Motown sound was direct, and there is a company which is making a new version of the direct box that Jamerson plugged into. And that's the actual sound of Motown is that, but it wasn't just that. They were running through that direct box through some tube gear in the studio, and the tape formulation they were using, the tape speed they were using, all these things factor into it. But there's a movie that came out 20 years ago now, Standing in the Shadows of Motown. And Bob, I can't remember his name now. He was kind of like the second bassist at Motown. Jameson was the A guy, and Bob, I can't remember his last name, was the B guy. But he played in that movie because Jameson sadly died a long time ago. And he had a fantastic Motown bass sound, as he should, because he was the guy on that recording. It was all live. See if you can look up what the bass rig for Standing in the Shadow of Motown was, because that's one of the best ones I've ever heard. I know Hutch Hutchinson, who plays with Bonnie Raitt, does that really well, but he uses an SVT, and that's for various reasons that's not usually a good option these days, especially if you have to carry it yourself or pay for the tubes. All right, so we're back at 3. Let's take another intermission, and we will come back in 7 minutes. Thanks. One other thing to keep in mind is that for a lot of guys, if you play bass, and it's not your primary instrument, but you play bass, you don't necessarily have to have a bass amp. This is Squier P bass, though I put a real bridge and electronics and a Fralin 5% underwound pickup in it. This is going to the same amp you were hearing before. I'll roll the tone off. I can't remember how it goes. Anyway, so it makes me happy. And especially if you have a twin or a Bassman or a super reverb, you may not need a bass amp unless you're using it for gigs, but for practice, even that's a good sound in this room, and that's not that loud. Let's see, where were we? All right, so let me turn on my little nagging reminder again. I would not recommend the Mesa Express 550 as far as Mesa amps go. I would not recommend any Mesa as far as amps go. There's almost nothing you can do preventative maintenance on a Mesa Tremoverb. You make sure the pots are tight. You make sure all the nuts are tight. There's just not much you can do. When they fail, they're going to fail because, how much money do you want to spend on preventative maintenance on an amp that originally cost $3,000 plus? Go through and replace all the 400 volt rated coupling caps with 630 volt caps. That gets expensive. The Vactrols fail. The pots in those things fail. The traces are too close together. The conformal coating becomes conductive over time. There's just not a lot to do. And the center return jacks and sometimes the speaker jacks on those get really corroded. So you can, spray some deoxit on your jacks from time to time, I suppose. Let's see. Yeah, there's other tremolo circuits. There's the Fender's got like three, and Vox and Magnetone. Those are the big three. The Gibson T is pretty much the same as you'd find in the Princeton by Fender. A bias trim on the output, and then Fender had the one on the Tremolux that varied the bias of a preamp tube versus the bias going to the output tubes. There's the Opto trim that Fender did. Everyone knows from the AB763 amps, the twin reverb, the super reverb, deluxe reverb. And then there's the harmonic trim that Fender did, and say this 61 through 62, 63 concert and pro and stuff. And that's very similar to the one that that Vox used in the AC30 and how it functions. And that's not too dissimilar from what Magnetone did, but Magnetone used inductors rather than capacitance shifts, like Fender and Vox did, and then Magnetone also did a stereo split of sorts. So those are pretty much the ways that they are done, and they all sound different. And a lot of them, the Strymon Flint, aside from that noise floor, the problem I have with it, the tremolo in that thing is fantastic and gives you a good bias trim, a really great harmonic trim, and a very, very good opto trim. You're just not going to get the stereo. Well, it does stereo, but it doesn't do the real Magnetone thing. Magnetone's a weird and wonderful thing, but that phasey sound you get from the Fender harmonic trim and the Vox. I love that. Hey, Rocket Maths, appreciate that. Anything to gain from pulling V5 and an AB763? If you don't use a tremolo, V5 being present, it really doesn't matter at all. In theory, not having it present is going to give you slightly higher B plus on the other preamp tubes. It's going to give you slightly more heater voltage, but it's real. Either case is negligible. It's just not much current being drawn from that, either in the B plus or the heater supply. I would suggest, even if you don't use the trem, to keep V5, keep a 12AX7 there in case you're on a gig and something goes wrong with one of the 12AX7s in V1, V2, or V4, in which case then you got a spare right there in the amp and you know it works. And as far as disabling the tremolo to get more gain, the people talk about the Stevie Vaughan stuff, it's not that huge a difference. You can if you want, but I don't think it makes any real sense to. Especially if it's an old super reverb, keep it stock as much as possible. If you can't play through a stock super reverb, it's not the amp. Matt Johnson, you've been giving me way too many super chats. I appreciate that. I'm glad you got the Stephen Grosvenor. Yeah, build yourself an AC15. They're very wonderful amps. Enjoy it. Hey, Captain Grumpus. No, the AC10, if you're talking about the current ones, the AC10 Custom C1 is horrible, whereas the 15 and the 30 are fairly spectacular for current production amps. Yeah, the AC10 C1 is really not good at all for various reasons, and I've got 2 or 3 videos up showing why. The vintage AC10 is a wonderful thing, and it's almost as good as the AC15. They do a few things to limit the gain, so the old JMI AC10 doesn't quite hang with the AC15. But I've got a vintage AC10 on the channel I featured not that long ago, and I just got the speakers for that amp reconed, and I'm sending the baffle off to get the grill cloth replaced, at which point I'll put it all back together and do a final playing video of that 64 AC10, which is a fantastic little amp. But the 64 AC10 is a fantastic amp. The current production AC10 C1, avoid Danger Will Robinson. Yeah, hey, Count Domingo. Yeah, I don't play. About 7 people in the world give a damn, but I'm glad you're one of them. Yeah, I love this Flight Master with the. I have different straps for it, and I need to get the NDC strap, which is a better, it's the correct strap, and it's better. This one wants to come undone on me sometimes. My wrist is big enough that it's really at its limit. This is like a $20 version. I need to get the $70 version. It's just a lot of money to spend on a piece of elastic, But in the summer especially, this is much more comfortable, and it looks groovy. I'm not. Hey, Eddie Ledger. I'm not familiar with the PV Classic MH20. I know the Classic 20, but I don't know the MH20. So I don't know I can't give you any advice. Thank you for your kind words on the next post, but I don't know that amp, so I don't want to just start saying, well, in theory, I don't know it. Let's see. I don't think of Sano or Sano amps. I don't have an opinion either way. I'm unfamiliar with them, Seaberg 10. Sorry. Let's see. Hey, Ollie. On the 68 Custom, yeah, the 18K and 6.8 removal. First of all, you just jumper the 18K. You can see literally where they've got the trace cut on the board, and they just put an 18K resistor there. Remove that 18K resistor and figure out where each side of the cut is, and put a little bit of wire there, so you no longer have that 18K nonsense. Or you can leave the 18K in there and just jumper across the 18K. that tells you where to solder. That will give you to the that'll give you back to the super reverb tone stack. And at that point, you will have the super reverb normal channel. If you want to have the sound of the super reverb tremolo channel, as most people use it, where they had a 10K audio taper pot, and most people leave that somewhere around noon, around 5, you would either replace the 6.8K resistor or jumper another resistor across it to end up with about 1.2K. Because that's where a 10K audio taper, 10% taper pot on old super reverb lands around noon. Is about 1K, just a little bit more sometimes. So if you want to have the sound of the reverb channel of the super reverb with the mid spot at noon, put about a 1.2K there. If you want to have the sound of the normal channel of the super reverb, leave the 6.8K. But either way, get rid of the 18K and jumper the cut traces. Hey, good. And a volume pedal can be used as an expression pedal. And in most situations, an expression pedal is used with synthesizers and other electronic devices that send out a control voltage, typically 5 volts, and variations in that control voltage going through a pot are interpreted by the brain to raise a filter or change the volume or the envelope of the synthesizer, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of volume pedals can be used as expression pedals. Not all of them, because some of them you do use stereo and stuff. Not every expression pedal makes a good volume pedal. Most things sold as an expression pedal solely aren't shielded, so you don't really want to run your audio through it, and you may not have a good taper and maybe low impedance. So that's the difference between a volume pedal and expression pedal. Expression pedal on a piano can be used for, say your keyboard player's got an expression pedal. For one song, it's going to be controlling the volume. Another song may be controlling how much reverb or effects are on there, or a filter. Say he wants to go on like an old 70s synth sound, and his hands are busy. He can assign that parameter to his expression pedal to his foot. Your eye did the resistive load trick on the studio monitors. They were Chevy taillight bulbs. Wouldn't surprise me. I imagine Chevy taillight bulbs are not too dissimilar from what we use in Fenders for lamps, just a higher current, higher voltage version. Probably still 12 volt, just higher current, much brighter. Yeah, OTOS. Yeah, Joan Osborne kills on What Becomes of the Broken Hearted. That entire concert is great. I'm not a huge fan of the Bootsy Collins stuff, but it's Bootsy Collins, man. It's still cool, but man, that's a great movie, and I'm so glad that they did that at that time when most of the Snake Pit players were still able to perform and to receive that recognition before they passed. I think almost all of them have passed since then. So. Oh, question mark in. I appreciate that, man. I'm just talking about stuff I love, and I always picture I'm just talking to people who also love this stuff. And we all come from different backgrounds, and this is what we have in common, so this is what we talk about. And I try not to put myself in the role of teacher. I'm the guy with the microphone, it's my channel and all that. But I hope none of you ever feel like I'm talking down to you. There are things I have learned that not every musician understands. Or musicians may have noticed, but they don't understand why this behavior with the amps and guitars and stuff. So I try to be an intermediary between your gear and you, but not like I'm not descending from a mountain, dispensing my wisdom with you great unwashed masses. Most of you, I assume, bathe at least once a week. Hey, D. Yamariv Thank you very much. He's got the, yeah, I've got a lot of videos on the channel already showing what I upgrade on the AC30 hand wireds. And I go into various levels of detail in those videos, but I, I, I don't give out all my secrets, but I give out an awful lot. If you're qualified to do the work, you can see those videos and see what I'm doing. A lot of it's in the filter caps. Look at the filter caps that I send it out with versus the filter caps come in with. A lot of it is a lot of it's just in the voltages, and the filter caps set the voltages. And screen grid resistors and such, and I almost always discuss the bias changes I make. What I would do to the damn hot switch is one of those little secrets I keep to myself. But I think if you put it this way, get a 250K pot. Find the two lugs of that switch that go open when you put it to hot. Put that 250K pot across those lugs, which would normally be open when the switch is at hot, and then turn, just use like lugs 1 and 2 or lugs 2 and 3. Doesn't matter. One's clockwise, one's counterclockwise. And turn it until you like the sound of the hot position, and then you'll have your own magic setting there. Yeah, bass face. Sorry, man. Everyone who knows me makes fun of my guitar faces. I can't do it. I don't know. I mean, thank God I'm not like playing in a classical orchestra where everyone else will be there so elegant in their tuxes and I'd be like, yeah. Anyway. If John Mayer ever needs a sub, I can do it from the neck up. Driven to beers, absolutely. You're describing. It depends on your price point. You're describing a 63 through 69 Princeton reverb or deluxe reverb. Those are now very expensive. The AC15 C1 would be another good choice. If you have I don't know how good the power supply, and you have, the actual electricity supply in the Dominican Republic, if it's filtered and safe and consistent. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions. It looks like a beautiful place, but I know the infrastructure can be very difficult on islands. You may consider, if reliability and low cost of maintenance is key, you might be happiest or happier with a Boss Katana or similar, because it will do what you're looking for without costing very much, and if it were to die, it's not expensive to replace. But the real answer is probably a 60s through early 70s Princeton reverb or deluxe reverb, or one of the reissues with some upgrades, or the AC15 C1, though the AC15 C1 would be very, very heavy to have shipped to the Dominican Republic. You might have good luck with some of the Milkman stuff, which I believe is a mixture of tube and solid state, but I don't know. I would really need to know your budget, and I don't mean to put your financial business in front of everyone, Claire, but shoot me an email. I'd be glad to contact you and maybe help you. I have a weird question. Patrick Williams says, why does tone change and distortion increase by miles if you put a resistor between your output primaries while they're both connected to pin 3 of your power tubes? Because you'd be partially shorting the output transformer. So the primaries would, instead of having a very large resistance between them, and would have a very much smaller resistance between them, they'd leak across them, and they'd cancel each other out to a degree, because one of them is going positive while the other one's going negative. And if they're joined together with that resistor, you're going to get some frequency cancellation, and you're going to get distortion, and it's not a good idea. Now, there are ways that you can do a filter which would use a resistor in series with a capacitor between the primaries, and that's what Dr. Z does on the little, what's that little bitty amp called? Anyway, it's called a Zobel network, and that's an old trick for stability in the output section, and rolls off highs in a controlled way to do it. But in general, what you're describing is what we consider a really bad idea. I'm trying to be kind, but there are reasons amps don't do that. You might occasionally see a Zobel network which can do that, but even so, better to let the output transformer work as designed without any additional resistance connection between them. Hey, Mitch, if you got a 64 Super Reverb and the trem intensity is weak, the 3 speed is fine, all pots function just weak. Your V5 is a common suspect. The Roach could be bad, or you could have, if you have the old cathode bypass cap on V5B, that could also cause weakness. Make sure you've got a fresh 4.7 microfarad to 22 microfarad cap there for the bypass. Make sure that resistor is 100K, and make sure you got 10 meg and 100K on connected to each side of the Roach, and then those go to 220K to B plus. If that's all fine and dandy, you might have a bad intensity pot, but more likely you've got a bad Roach. The LDRs go to crap in those things. Can you see in the little gap in the black plastic that the neon's flashing? If you don't see the neon bulb flashing, sometimes you got to kind of peek through the little window, then you've got a problem in the driver, a bad bulb, but typically you got a bad LDR inside the Roach. So I think replacement one from Tube Depot is like $8-9. I have not had a Coke or Cock Jupiter. I've had one of their big 50-watt 1x12s. It was really well built, a little bit on the heavy side for what it was, but I thought it sounded great and was well built, with the exception of a couple of the decisions they made in terms of how things were layered and assembly versus when service was necessary, undoing some unnecessary layering. But a good quality amp, and really sounded nice. But that was a different model. I don't remember which one it was. Let's see. Hey, Josh Roberts. Hey, Bob and Nader 5736. Oh, yes. This is that Modesto, California high watt. It is done with the exception of that last remaining buzz in the heater supply. And I ordered a 1 watt 100 ohm pot from Mauser that I'll use to troubleshoot that, and then whatever the magic value that makes the hum dial out, the buzz go away, I will measure that and then replace it with 2 fixed resistors, because even a 1 watt pot will not last a very long time as a heater balance pot, and there aren't any 2 watt pots that I've found of the correct values that mount to the chassis in such a way that they're only internally adjustable. So, it's a tricky thing. The old pots that Fender used in like a Twin and in the 70s amps when it was on the rear panel, those things almost always fail. And especially in like the Marshall Plexi reissue amps where they have that little bitty blue trim pot in series with the 200 ohm resistors. That blue trim pot's rated for like a 1/4 watt. They burn up all the damn time. So A pot's occasionally necessary to find where the magic balance in a heater supply is. Not very often, but when it is, it is. But there's not really a pot that is rated for the amount of current present. You don't want a pot to be the failure mode. Hey, Josh Roberts. Yeah, the 63 Deluxe, the parts are en route. They should be here Monday or Tuesday. And I dropped the speaker off to be reconed last week, and I got a call from Dave Halford today while I was walking the dog before the start of this, and it is already reconed. He had turned out he had an Oxford kit, and it's all ready. So I'm gonna pick that up on Monday. So that 63 Deluxe should be done, Wednesday, Thursday, depending on at the speed of UPS for the parts I ordered. I'm glad that you're liking this the sound of your Blackheart. You got a wonky series parallel switch, as in it seems to be intermittent. Sometimes on those old switches, you can just hit them with a bit of deoxit and work it back and forth, and everything's fine. If not, remove it and hardwire it so that it's always in series, because parallel effects loops are never your friend. Let's see. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I said inductors, didn't I? It's varistors. Yeah. And Magnetone is making those varistors again, but they will not sell them to anyone else. And they are, the old ones that are available are hideously expensive. I don't know why I said inductors. Yeah, they're varistors. Thank you, Gooden. There's so much to keep track of when you're doing this live, and you don't want to make a mistake, and so that you always feel that pressure not to make a mistake, and so then you're much more likely to make a mistake. Thanks, Lars Johansson. Brad knows as much as I do. I think Gooden's forgotten most of what I know. I'm not the only guy in the world, but I do have the best voice, so that's me. I'm kidding. That's what I hear, though. What would I advise the bias, I assume, to be on a 73 Park Super 100 lead amp? Thanks, Simon G. And thanks for the compliments. I would want to know a lot of things beyond just the bias, because on those Park Super 100s, like the Marshall majors and such, a lot of times on 73, that B plus will be really high. And so if you have a really high B plus, you can also have a really high screen supply. Sometimes the screen voltage can exceed the rating of the tubes, especially if you're trying to use current production tubes versus some Sylvania, Philips or whatever from 1973. The cooler the bias is, the higher the B plus is. The higher the bias is, the lower the B plus is, and as the B plus fluctuates, it's going to bring the screen down. So I would want to find the magic point where the bias is between 50 and 70 typically, and if I need to increase the bias a bit to bring the screen where it needs to be, I'll do that. But I also want to make sure that the wall voltage is not going to be drifting. I don't want for me to bias it at 70% with the wall voltage is 120 volts. And then in their studio, the wall voltage is routinely 130 volts because of whatever's happening on their part of the grid, in which case the bias is no longer 70, it's like closer to 80, and those tubes won't last, in which case they're going to have a problem. So I'm never afraid to go more conservative, like 50, 55%, 60% on bias. But if I do that and the B plus goes up and the screen goes up and all of a sudden the screen voltage max is being exceeded by 80 volts, sometimes I'll want to go through there and put like a Zener on the screens to drop 40, 75 volts on the Zener on the screen, just to keep everything in line. So there's more to it than just bias. All these things interact, and it's a balancing act. You got to keep them all in mind. Yeah, Martin. Brad's Guitar Garage there. He's a friend of mine. He's one of my mods. If you are unfamiliar with his channel, check his channel out too. He's really good, and he's funny, and he's vulgar as hell, and he's Australian, but we don't hold that up against him. I'm scrolling down. Hey, Mark Spurgeon, how's your back? All right, Natasha Tana. He's got an EL84 tube. Loses the glow after 10 seconds. I recommend changing fuses. Still having issue. Turn the head for 1 minute with no cab before this failure start happening. If the tube isn't glowing, I don't think it has anything to do with the cab connection. It sounds like you've got a heater that's intermittent. I don't know which amp you have, Natas, but it sounds to me that it is losing its heater supply. That's what makes them glow. So if it's just one out of the four, check it. I don't know if your amp has got actual wires to the heaters, or if it's a trace. It could be a broken solder joint. That's the first thing I would check. Hey, Lucas, all the way from New Zealand. That's cool, man. I do have thoughts. The Plexi reissues, in general, are pretty good. They commonly fail with that little blue trim pot in the heater supply line, as I mentioned 10 minutes ago. And the issue is really easy because they have a turret here, and then that's a ground, and that goes to the that goes to the center point of that little trim pot, and then from those trim pots it goes to 2 turrets on each side of the trim pot, and 100 ohm resistors going to 2 more turrets. And all you do is remove those resistors that are between turret A and turret B and turret C and D, and put new resistors from each side down all the way to that first turret, which is at ground, and you're just bypassing that little blue trim pot. The other issue, which is more problematic on the Marshall reissues, is the transformers don't always last. The power transformers often develop issues. But if it's 2015 and it's still working well, odds are you're fine. If you have a chance to play it before buying it, put your ear up towards the transformer area and see if it buzzes, and if the buzz changes if you touch it, if you can. If it changes when you touch it, it may just be loose. If it stays constant and you can hear a loud buzzing, that's one indication the power transformer is going to fail. But most of them are fine, but they're all plagued by the issue with that stupid heater balance circuit. Hey, Ollie, yeah. Negative feedback from 1.5K to 820 does increase the headroom. You're getting more negative feedback. The other, it depends on which channel. The reverb channel is about the same. Other than that, there's some differences in how the reverb's mixed. There's a 1 meg where instead of a 470 and stuff, so it has a little less reverb. But yeah, the negative feedback is pretty crucial. Beyond that, if you're comparing a 65 to a 68 on the reverb channel alone, aside from the amount of reverb that's present, and aside from the noise floor, because of the way the 68 does the channel mixing so stupidly, any other difference? There's some difference from the negative feedback, which can add to the noise, but it could also be one amp is biased differently, or the tubes, tubes nominally have a gain factor of 100. A 12X7 nominally has a gain factor of 100. But one amp may have 3 that are actually closer to 75 or 80, and the next amp may have a couple that are closer to 115. So you can have volume and gain differences between identical amps, let alone amps that are different in the ways they are. But yeah, I would recommend either changing the 1.5K to 820 ohms, or if you're not comfortable pulling the ward and removing it, soldering another 1.5K in parallel across it, which will get you to the same point. Spartan Pride, I don't have a recommended brown box setting for most tube amps because every amps are different. The goal you want is you would use the brown box if the heater voltage exceeded, say, 6.6 volts AC. They're nominally designed to run at 6.3 volts AC, but there's a safety margin. or maybe say 6.7. Anything over 6.7, you might want to bring down the mains until you're back in that range between 6 volts and 6.5 volts. That's probably where you want to be. And if you go too low and your heater drops like 5.8, you're probably too low. You may have some other issues. But, so basically what you're doing is you're saying, I want to make sure that the heaters are pretty close to 6.3 and that the B plus is not exceeding the rating of the filter caps, and that neither the B plus nor the screen voltage are exceeding the ratings of the output tubes being used. And if setting it to 114 achieves all those, then 114 is the right answer for that amp. Just be aware that you need to monitor that. Make sure that you're metering the actual voltage present versus, say, a 6 volt drop based on the mains. Well, if the mains are changing, you're changing along with it. You want to be able to say, no, no matter what the mains are, I'm still here. And that gets more expensive and complicated. Let's see. Hey, Jim Mass. All right. I have not completely eliminated ticking, but you added the 10 nanofarad. Okay. There's lead dress at V5, making sure that the lead dress at V5 does not contact any of the lead dress going to V6 or V4. You can also have the bleed ticking from the wires, the twisted wires typically, which are going to the tremolo pots, which are usually run in parallel to the wires going to the reverb pot, which can be very close to the treble middle bass, the tone stack wires. So sometimes getting the wires going to the tremolo speed and intensity pots physically moved away from the wires going to the reverb, or even lifted up off the board and moved even more. Sometimes that gets it out. So a lot of the fixing for that kind of stuff comes down to lead dress throughout, up by the pots and by the tube socket, and a chopstick is great. Sometimes rarely, you'll have a tube in V5 that for whatever reason creates ticking or popping or thudding sounds, and other 12AX7s don't. So try that as well. And sometimes I have found, and I don't know why, that if I desolder the wire going from the RCA jack that turns the tremolo on and off, desolder that, remove all the old solder, and reconnect it, sometimes that makes it go away. Sometimes there'll just be a bad connection, and sometimes I've had where that wire itself becomes microphonic. The wire that goes to the RCA jack to ground out to make the tremolo work, I think they get microfractures in that wire because it's a solid core wire, and I think they just get microfractures occasionally, and that's one of the things to look at too. So that's my list of suggestions. You'll keep at it; you'll find it. I don't know Henry Highstand's red plate. I think I had a red plate amp once, and it seemed pretty good. Yeah, I did. It was red plate. It was a Dumbly thing, and overall it was a good amp. But I will say that it had a 820 ohm plate resistor and plate where it's supposed to have an 82K plate resistor, and so the amp as it came to me, as it left the factory, as it was sold to the customer, was not particularly good. And I thought that was the kind of thing that should have been caught. But maybe there was a growing pain at the company. But it was, once I spotted it, I was happy to put in a 82K resistor and make that problem go away. It might have been reversed. It might have been someplace where it's supposed to be an 820 and had an 8.82K, but it was just one of those stripe reading decimal issues. Other than that, the amp was really nice. Hey, I'm glad that you got your Pro and your Vibrolux going. I'm very cool. I'm very glad to hear that. It's very cool. Yeah, keep playing around with that tremolo. Usually the 10 nanofarad will do it. Once in a blue moon, instead of having it across a roach, you'll want to have it across a 10 meg resistor. Sometimes that makes a difference. And maybe it's just because the moon is in a different house. I don't understand everything that goes on in these things. Old Fenders can be weird. Man, you didn't have to do that, Brad, but I like the way you did it. That was cool. This is a super chat. There are many others like it, but this one is mine. Let's see. Jack Streeter picked up a 67 Bandmaster recently. 3 holes in the back plate. That's such a shame. But anyway, I usually will if they're neatly drilled in a 3/8, you can put some nice looking plugs in those. I don't remember if it's Home Depot or Lowe's, but they carry some metal hole plugs in standard sizes that usually do a good job making those things look better. Yeah, if you post phase inverter master volume is always a good choice, and Bandmaster and up volume wise. I've got a video up 2 months back showing how I install post phase inverter in a I believe that was a super reverb, but it's just called master volume in a Fender or something like that. Look for that. It'll show you how 3-prong electrolytics, and then look at all my. I've got a playlist called Vintage Fenders. Look through there, and you'll get good ideas. A lot of cleaning, a lot of tightening of hardware, but electrolytics and the properly installed 2 electrical code, safety ground, new power cable, and getting all the chassis grounds done correctly, not to the transformer mounting hardware, which is what you're probably going to have in that 67. So go to my channel and find the Vintage Fender playlist and go to town. It's all there. Let's see. All right, Simon G, you're at 240 at the mains. Hopefully you won't have as much fluctuation as we do here in Memphis, but yeah. Whatever the magical drop is that gets you somewhere between 6 and 6.5 volts on your heater is there. Let's see. Okay, Natas, I'm not familiar with the Blackheart Little Giant, but if it's a single EL84 and it's Blackheart, it's probably a PCB mounted tube. I don't know that for sure, but if it's PCB mounted, you probably have a bad solder joint. It could still be a faulty fuse on the heater supply if they have one, or a bad solder joint for however the heater fuse is connected to things. Sorry, I'd have to see it. Okay. Hey, Bet 393 got a 220 volt Princeton. You want to change it to 120 volt USA usage? You can do it by changing the transformer. I'm not sure if the reissue series used transformers with multiple taps. So a lot of them could be wired for 240, 220, or 120, or 100, depending on how the primaries are wired. I'm not sure about the Princeton reissue. That was whether the export model had an adjustable primary. The domestic is only fixed for 120. But yeah, you can change the power transformer in that. You could also use a step-down transformer. Probably it'd be about the same price, probably about $100 either way. But yes, you can. The rest of the amp, once that's done, is easy. The issue with the Princeton reissue and other Fender reissues, if you change the power transformer, is if the replacement power transformer doesn't have all the quick connects already on it, and all the board connections on the amp are quick connects, you've got to solder a whole bunch of 1/4-inch quick connects to the wires coming off the transformer in order to have it connect well. It can be expensive for a tech to do that. Bebot, yes, absolutely. You don't ever have to use a master. Just the louder you run the amp, the more likely it is for the tubes to have some wear and tear, as well as your ears. But yeah, it's totally safe if everything else is working well. Black Star fan is upset with Brad. Oh, go cry into a great big pillow. Or is it a wee pillow with a great big head? Let's see. I'm trying to catch all the last questions. Brad, you can't afford me. You know that, man. How much to repair my amp? Yeah, we get that all the time. Hey, my amp goes bzzz. How much is it gonna cost? And is it ready yet? Well, I think the main issue with that, why no one's made a standalone harmonic tremolo circuit, the actual tube one, is the power supply issue. And I also think that Fender probably didn't want to do it because they wanted you to buy the damn concert and such, whereas the Reverb, once they got it dialed in, they put reverb in everything they could. That was their flagship concept, and they discontinued the harmonic trim because it was so hard to manufacture and have it work. It's kind of a roll of the dice whether any particular Fender with that old harmonic trim actually works. They can all be made to work, but as far as a production thing, it was probably a mistake on their part, but it's a cool sounding thing. So I think they were trying to get out of that harmonic tremolo as soon as possible because they were probably spending way too much time repairing them and training technicians to service them and such. And the opto trim did what people want, and it's much simpler with the lower parts count. Hey, thank you, Andy. 1966. Appreciate that. I look forward to these chats too. I appreciate that. I do look forward to these. I do them more often, except I think I wear out my welcome with you guys. But it's a nice thing to do every couple of weeks. Just check in with everyone and see what's up and make funny faces for the internet. But, you can't take yourself too seriously if you do this. It's just crazy. Hey, Sun Zubin. He says, what are some things to check if my neck P90 is crackling a bit as I play? The bridge pickup is just fine. Well, the first thing I would do is touch the pull pieces. Touch the, if it has a cover, touch the cover versus touching the pull pieces and see if you get that sound you get is staticky. Sometimes on a pickup, if you touch the pull pieces, you'll get a static sound. And in general, that static sound is not supposed to be there if you touch the pull pieces at the same time that you're touching the strings. It's supposed to all ground itself out. But if you have a loose ground wire somewhere, sometimes you can get static, or a pickup could have been installed backwards. And so that when you touch the pull piece, instead of being ground, you're actually getting it's like touching the tip of a guitar cable. You're injecting noise into things. So check and see if it happens when you touch the pickup anywhere, with and without touching the strings at the same time. If not, you probably have a bad solder joint, in which case you have to open it up. And hopefully it's not a casino like mine, because they're not fun to service inside. Yeah, I'm caught up for the first time. This is the first time ever that I have caught up to this chat before the very end, or at all, really. I don't think I've ever caught up to it at all once before. Time to talk about cooking in watches, or my latest obsession, kitchen knives. Well, I think we'll have to do a special stream for that. I think we're gonna just wrap it up. I think everyone would drop off if I start talking about cooking and watches and knives anyway, but maybe we'll do that, a special thing for the 30 people who would care, because they would really care. Or maybe we'll just do like the bench down view and talk about exchange knife technique tips and who can dice an onion faster. But I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. Slowly fluctuating volumes. Man, that's kind of okay. Oh, whoa. Oh, you flip the magnet. Okay, no, then flipping the magnet shouldn't do that, Sun Tzu. Flipping the magnet should just give you, the change in hum rejection, but it's possible that the pickup wasn't tightened all the way. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap up for the day. Wrap up for the weeks. I make a hell of a good chili. Maybe we'll do another video on that sometime. So let me get to my wrapping up screen, because it's a special screen I made and I forget to use. I'm supposed to do all this stuff. They tell you if you do all this stuff, you get so much money, all the money if you just push everyone's buttons and smash that like, blah, blah, blah. And I can't play the full game. I just don't want to talk about it. I don't, everyone who's here subscribes, and that means the world to me. Well, everyone who's here is comments. You can watch it without being a subscriber. You can't comment unless you're a subscriber. So I appreciate you all. And the liking does help me. So if anyone wants to give it a like, that'd be appreciated. But I don't want to be that guy who's always talking about it or playing it in every video, or this, especially when it's the same damn, be sure to do this, that, and the other in every video. If I was going to do that, I'd just give you ads all the time, right? I don't do that either. If this has been a 3-hour live stream, most live streams would have had, at least 8 ad breaks already. We're not going to do that because I love you guys.